Okay, so today we're going to be continuing our series where we do some of the team previews for the draft lottery teams that are going to be relying on some of the players in this class to try and get better. And the next team that we're going to be breaking down is the Detroit Pistons, who had historically one of their worst seasons and just one of the worst seasons in all of sports. But for me, I put down in terms of team needs and notes that they are just god-awful. They need to surround Cade with more offensive talent. Not necessarily a great shooting team. They're second to last in three-pointers made. I don't necessarily think that the prospects they have are bad, but I don't think Monty Williams is necessarily, and I'm not trying to throw this on Monty Williams, but I think it's been hard for him to try and kind of piece together the prospects to get the most out of these guys. I think they'll all have great individual careers, but as a team, it's clear that when you have a star like Cade, you just need to get more offensive talent around him. And I think in this year's draft, that's what they should look for, not necessarily another defensive player.
Yeah, the Pistons have one of the worst seasons of all time, especially towards the beginning of the season. They actually broke a record, I want to say, for most games lost in a row. So this is definitely a team that they've been looking forward to the draft for a long time. I would say their biggest thing this offseason would be deciding on what they're going to do with their backcourt. Like, are we married to Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham as a duo, or should we trade them? Because I feel like Ivey had a really good rookie year, not so much his second year, partially because his coach wouldn't play him for most of the beginning of the season. But if it's not going to work with the coach who you have locked in for a really long time for a whole bunch of money, I think you have to just make the decision of, are you okay with letting that pick just devalue and become a bench player, or do you want to trade him while his value is somewhat anything still and not avoid like Killian Hayes situation? So I think that'll be a really big thing for them. And if that's the case, I would say they would definitely need to look at guard in the draft. If not, I would say they would need to look and fill a wing position. Definitely someone who can shoot the ball really well, since Ivy or Cade aren't great shooters at this point in their careers. But God, whatever happens, please, for the love of God, do not take another big man. Detroit, do not take another big man. You have too many. They all do the same thing. Do not take another one.
I'm on the opposite side, Cam, I have to say. I know you're saying they've got a lot of bigs, but if you go down the list, you've got Jalen Duren, who I think is still probably the best one out of all of them. That's your starter going forward. But then you've got Marvin Bagley, Beef Stew, James Wiseman. At this point, I'm pretty sure everyone is off all of those trains. So you are replacing three bigs that in the future, your plans are kind of just scrapped. And I feel like if you have the opportunity in this class to go grab an Alex Sarr or maybe they go trade down and pick up one of these later picks from the Spurs in the late 10s, and you could add a Donovan Clingan to it where you could get a pick and roll going with Cade Cunningham and also have that defensive anchor like a Donovan Clingan in the paint. I feel like that could be a pretty interesting option. Yeah, Jalen Duren isn't a shooting big, so maybe the spacing with Clingan wouldn't work that well, but just because you have a lot of bigs on the roster doesn't mean you should just not address anything, because none of them are moving the needle at all, clearly, based on this season record.
Well, I think one of the biggest issues with the Pistons coming into this, well, for starters, Monty Williams' lineups didn't really provide a lot of spacing. Like, he was starting Thompson and Killian Hayes over Jaden Ivey, and that's not a knock on Thompson and Ivey, but Killian Hayes, like, come on. But I just think, yeah, you could draft a big, but I feel like at the same time, that's not really going to move the needle forward necessarily. And obviously with this draft, there's not really any picks you can make that are going to necessarily take your team over the edge, and they'll still probably be in the running for the 2025 draft. But I still feel like you have to address the main concerns. And I feel like you have to look at a guy like Modest Buzelis, just get somebody who can stroke the ball. I know he's had questions about his shooting, but I think he's a better shooter than what the stats suggest. But I feel like, especially too with a guy like Cade, like you want to start trying to build stuff around him now. And I just feel like you have to improve that spacing. You have to give Monty Williams more options to begin with. And I don't know. I feel like getting a big two, that's also something that can be addressed with a veteran later on, personally.
Yeah. So I do want to make it clear, I really do like Jaden Ivey's game. Like, I don't think they should trade him. But if your coach is dead set on not playing him, then I think you should. But as far as, like, whether or not they should take it big, I'm not completely off the Duren train. I don't think he's necessarily gotten better, but I think what he is and what he's been since he's gotten into the league is serviceable. Like, I think it's someone who can work. He rebounds the ball really well. He provides some level of rim protection, not the greatest, but not the worst. As far as Bagley, Wiseman, I think you gave up too much to throw in the towel this early. I just think you have to give him another shot, especially because it's not like this year's big men class is just off the chart spectacular. Like, Alex Sarr is at the top of almost all of our big boards, but I wouldn't say he's a sure thing. Like, he has his own issues with being able to catch the ball, and he projects as possibly being a shooter, but that hasn't come to reality yet. And you don't want to get in a situation, I don't think, that where you have James Wiseman, the idea is good, but he's not. Isaiah Stewart, someone who is a bench big if on any really good team. And then you have Jalen Duren, who's an athletic big who can't shoot. And then Alex Sarr ends up being the same thing. Then you wasted another year's pick and we're down the road and you have to address the wing situation again. So I think if they are going to keep Ivy, they should definitely go wing. As far as which wing they should go, Miles Buzelis would concern me on this team just because if you want to to me, the Pistons are like a unique team. Most teams at the top of the draft should probably take the best player. Mm-hmm. But I think their roster is just good enough. Like, their roster is, like, there's talent on the roster. So I think they should try. I just think it doesn't fit necessarily. So I think they should probably go fit. And Buzelis is someone who is going to need the ball in his hands to be effective. Like, he's a 3 just because he's so tall, but he plays more like a 1/2. So I would say he clashes too much with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey to me. I would personally pray to God Riche was there or one of the other wings. I would say Riche is probably the best for them because he can shoot the ball despite his shooting struggles as of late. He's had a decent track record of shooting it, and they have no one who can shoot it on this team, to be honest. So
yeah, he's like, in terms of a 5-man lineup, he fits right in at that 4 spot. If you want to keep the Cunningham, Ivy, and Thompson lineup together with Jalen Duren at the 5, because then you bring in Riche to fill kind of that 4-man spot that was up in the air. And if his shooting does come to fruition, then all of a sudden that helps space the floor a little bit with Jalen Duren in the 5 spot. But even if he can't necessarily become like a top tier 35+% shooter, he still has like the defensive versatility with the long arms to provide some defense on the perimeter, I feel like. So yeah, maybe not necessarily drafting like a center, but still drafting someone in the front court, I think is going to be crucial for them to maybe take a next step.
Yeah, I think him and Thompson on the perimeter could potentially be really scary down the line. Like, they could really give teams front court like a really hard time scoring.
And we talk about they have so many bigs, but they're giving up almost 120 points per game as a team, which was near the bottom in the entire league. So you got to figure out a way. I know they've got some potential defensive pieces, but we have to see it actually come to fruition as fast as next year, because you can't continue to be a team that gives up over 100 and however many points and think you're going to make the playoffs.
For the Pistons, I don't know if they want to make the playoffs. Like, last year was really weird to me. I just think their roster is too good for where they ended up. So next year will be really interesting. I think they're a team that I would put on tank watch. Like, if the lineup stuff is as weird as it was this year, I would say maybe they were playing a long game and banking on getting like a Cooper Flag or somebody in next year's class.
I think even too, they don't even if it's a repeat of this year, I don't even think they necessarily have to try to tank. Like, it'll just
happen.
Yeah. And I feel like, too, that the front office kind of knows. Like, I was reading some articles. The front office, everybody knows, like, what you're getting out of this class isn't necessarily, I don't want to say they're not going to move the needle forward, but at least not right away, you know? And I think the 2025 class, it definitely, as of right now, it definitely does have some guys who could help you take a bigger leap, so to speak. So I do think that they do also have next year's draft class in mind. So with that being said, it will also be interesting to kind of see what they do from like a free agency standpoint. It'll be interesting to see if they try to go after any more veterans and who they go after to try and supplement Cade or to improve their defense. But all in all, I just feel like for me, the main thing is just get better offensively. I still think that Jalen Duren can be the anchor for a good defensive team, even though he had some struggles this year. Really, I just think they need a fresh start, another season, and then we'll revisit this next year.
I want to get your guys' thoughts on potentially a shocking like trade package they could put together, because I think they've got most of their future picks, like the ownership of it. I don't think they've made too many moves in the future where other teams would own their picks. And looking at their roster age, over half the guys on this Detroit roster are 24 years old or less, and they only have 2 guys that are older than 30. So what do you think about potentially putting together some sort of package where you decide who you want to keep, whether that's Cade and Jaden, or if you want to give up on some of these other young bigs, and also include like some sort of draft pick package where you could go after some sort of veteran player that's more of like a proven talent to try to shift things. Because they've been trying to reload with all this young talent in the draft for the last 5 or 6 years, and it hasn't worked.
I think one, whoever it is, you have to make sure it works. Like this, it would be really bad from a fan's perspective if you went out and got somebody and one, they didn't want to be there. Detroit, it's not the most sexiest option of destinations to be traded to. So you have to make sure the person wants to be there, and you have to make sure they fit with the roster, because if you give away what capital you have now for a player that doesn't make you significantly better, or that just leaves in a year or two once their contract is up, you could be in a situation where you're just destitute at the bottom of the league for the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, too, because timeline, I think the waiting game, that's the major factor with this team. And if they trade some of those younger guys for people who aren't going to have a lot of shelf life with the Pistons, I feel like as a front office, that's a major mistake. The guys who I feel like really Cade is their only untouchable guy. But I feel like the main guys I could see moving is Ivy, maybe even Duren, because I feel like he's maybe their only guy, only big at least, who I feel like other teams would have.
And he's not making any money yet. He's at $4 million next year and then $6 in 2025.
Yeah, Thompson, I feel like he's a guy who the Pistons probably want to stick with, just because obviously his offensive game is a struggle, but I feel like the defensive value that he has, there's a lot there. And he can be a point of attack guy, which is, as we've seen with a guy like Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, those guys are important to have in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
So.